The tear fell before Melissa even heard the priest speak. It slipped hot and silent down her cheek, catching in the lace of her veil. She stood at the altar of a cathedral that felt more like a tomb, stone walls swallowing every sound except the thunder of her own heartbeat. Candlelight threw bloody reds and deep purples across the marble floor, and the guests seated in the front pews weren't guests at all. They were soldiers. 15 men in black suits, eyes scanning exits instead of the bride. Not a single one smiled. Behind her, Melissa's younger sister Jada stood trembling, mascara streaking both cheeks, clutching a bouquet she'd been ordered to hold. She'd begged their father to find another way, screamed until her voice cracked. None of it mattered. The debt had been sold, the deal had been signed. And the man who now owned that debt stood 3 feet from Melissa, close enough that she could smell cedarwood cologne and something underneath it, something metallic, like the memory of gunpowder. Hak Yong. The name made grown men cross the street. He ran the most feared Korean syndicate in the Midwest, an empire built on silence and the kind of loyalty that only came from men who knew what happened to those who betrayed him. A rival boss found hanging from a bridge overpass. A federal informant who vanished from witness protection. 3 city councilmen whose careers were dismantled in a single week through leaks and photographs that surfaced like bodies from deep water. And this man was lifting his hand toward Melissa's face, every muscle in her body locked. Her fingers crushed the stems of her white roses until thorns bit into her palms. She didn't run. She couldn't. Not with her father's life hanging by a thread, not with Jada standing 6 feet away, young enough and pretty enough to become a replacement if Melissa refused. So she stood still, jaw clenched, and waited for whatever cruelty would come first. His fingers were tattooed. Dark ink crawled across every knuckle and disappeared beneath his black suit cuff. These were hands that had ended lives, hands that had built an empire from blood. And yet, he didn't grab her. Instead, with a gentleness, so at odds with everything she knew about him that it made her stomach turn, he produced a small white cloth from his breast pocket and pressed it to her cheek, catching the tear just before it reached her jaw. His touch was featherlight. Careful, the way someone handles something they're terrified of breaking. I will burn the world before I let it make you cry again. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it carried through the silent cathedral like a blade across stone. Melissa searched his face for the cruelty she'd been promised, the cold emptiness of a man who treated people like chess pieces. But Hak Yong's dark eyes held none of it. Sharp features, almost aristocratic. Faint tattoos climbing his neck into the collar of his white shirt. Top button undone, no tie, as if even on his wedding day he refused to let anything close around his throat. But his eyes. They looked at her the way people looked at altars and prayers and the last sunset before a storm. There was devotion in that gaze, fierce and unguarded and terrifyingly real. Melissa didn't understand it. She didn't trust it. And that confusion was worse than any blow, because at least with violence, she would have known where she stood. The priest cleared his throat. The ceremony continued. And somewhere behind them, Jada pressed both hands over her mouth to keep from sobbing, because she had seen it too, the way the most dangerous man in Chicago looked at her sister, like she was the only sacred thing left in his world. 48 hours earlier, Melissa McGuire hadn't known Hak Yong's name. She'd been doing what she always did on a Tuesday evening, closing down her father's bar in Bridgeport, wiping tables, counting a register that came up short for the 3rd week running, and pretending she didn't notice the bruise darkening beneath Patrick McGuire's left eye. At 27, Melissa had spent nearly a decade cleaning up her father's messes. Her father had a talent for trouble the way some men had a talent for music, effortless and ruinous. He'd gambled since before Melissa was born, and after her mother Lorraine died of pancreatic cancer when Melissa was 19, Patrick fell apart completely. Melissa dropped out of DePaul halfway through her junior year. She took over the bar. She paid the mortgage, kept food in the fridge, made sure Jada had lunch money and clean clothes, and someone who showed up to parent-teacher conferences. She held everything together while Patrick gambled away every cent she earned, and then some. The debts stacked up like bodies after a gang war. $5,000 to a bookie, $20,000 to a card room in Chinatown. Then, 6 figures, owed to people whose names Patrick wouldn't say out loud. People who communicated through broken windows and envelopes filled with photographs of Melissa and Jada walking to the grocery store. That Tuesday night, as she locked the bar and turned toward her car, 2 black sedans were waiting in the parking lot. Headlights off, engines running. 4 men stepped out. The tallest, a Korean man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, spoke first. Melissa McGuire. It wasn't a question. Your father owes a debt he cannot pay. Our boss has purchased that debt. He is offering your family a single path to settlement. Marriage. To him, in 48 hours. Melissa's keys bit into her palm. She looked at each man. None reached for a weapon. They didn't need to. And if I say no? The scarred man tilted his head. Then, the original holders reclaim what is owed. They deal in flesh, Miss McGuire. Your father, your sister, you. There is no version of no that ends with your family intact. Ask. She thought about running. She thought about the baseball bat behind the counter, the pepper spray in her glove box, the police station 4 blocks east. None of it would matter. These men existed in a world where police were just another variable to manage. When? She said. Thursday, 6 in the evening. He produced a garment bag from the car and placed it on her hood. Your dress. The boss chose it himself. The sedans pulled away without another word. And Melissa stood alone in the parking lot holding a wedding dress picked out by a man she'd never met, about to marry into a world that swallowed people whole. Before we continue with this story, if you're new here, this channel brings you the most captivating love stories, filled with drama, romance, and powerful women who overcome the impossible. If that sounds like something you'd love, hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Now, let's get back to Melissa's story. Melissa didn't sleep that night. She sat on the edge of the bathtub with the garment bag draped over her knees and stared at the tile floor until the grout lines blurred. The dress inside was ivory silk, hand-stitched, heavier than anything she'd ever held. It smelled faintly of cedarwood, the same scent she wouldn't recognize until she stood at that altar 2 days later. She found her father at the kitchen table the next morning, nursing a glass of whiskey at 7 a.m., with the look of a man who'd already said goodbye to himself. Patrick McGuire had always been a big man, broad-shouldered, with hands that could palm a basketball, but the gambling had carved him hollow. His cheeks were sunken. His knuckles were scabbed. And when he looked up at Melissa, standing in the doorway, holding that garment bag, his eyes filled with the kind of shame that doesn't wash off. How much? Melissa asked. He told her. The number was so large it didn't feel real. He'd borrowed from the Yun cartel, a trafficking operation that moved drugs and people with equal indifference across 3 state lines. When he couldn't pay, they'd offered terms no legitimate lender would recognize. His daughters as collateral. Both of them. They were going to take you and Jada, Patrick whispered. Sell you overseas. I couldn't. I tried to. His voice broke apart like wet paper. Then this other man, this Hak Yong, he bought the debt. All of it. He said he only wanted one thing. Me. Patrick couldn't look at her. Melissa set the garment bag on the counter. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab that whiskey glass and shatter it against the wall the way her mother would have. But none of that would change anything. The debt was real. The threat was real. And somewhere across the city, a man she'd never met was waiting for his bride. Does Jada know? She asked. No. Good. Don't tell her the real reason. Melissa picked up the garment bag and walked toward the stairs. At the bottom step, she stopped. If something happens to me in that house, you get Jada out of this city. You don't gamble. You don't drink. You get her somewhere safe, and you stay sober long enough to keep her alive. That's the only thing I'll ever ask you for." Patrick didn't answer. He just sat there, a big man made very small by the weight of what he'd done. The estate sat on 40 acres north of Chicago, hidden behind stone walls and iron gates that opened with the slow certainty of a jaw closing around prey. 3 stories of dark stone and glass, modern and severe, surrounded by cameras and men who patrolled with the discipline of soldiers who'd never needed to rush. She was escorted to a bedroom on the 2nd floor, larger than her father's entire apartment. A 4-poster bed with sheets that felt like water. A closet stocked with clothes in her exact size. Everything was beautiful. Everything was a cage. Melissa locked the door, sat on the floor with her back against it, and waited. She waited for the knock that would become a demand, for the handle to rattle, for the lock to give way under a shoulder or a boot. She'd heard the stories. She knew what powerful men did with women they'd purchased. She had mapped every exit in her mind on the walk from the car. 2 windows in this room, a hallway to the left, stairs at the far end, and she'd calculated how far she could get before someone stopped her. Not far enough. The knock came at 10 p.m. Soft, 2 taps. "Melissa." Hak Yong's voice through the door, low and measured. "There is food outside your room. Eat when you're ready. The door locks from your side only. No one will enter without your permission. Not my men, not the staff." A pause. "Not me." She didn't move. She didn't breathe. She listened to his footsteps retreat down the hallway, steady and unhurried, until the silence swallowed them. The food was still warm when she opened the door an hour later. A tray with rice, braised short ribs, pickled vegetables, and a pot of tea. Beside it, a folded note in handwriting so precise it looked printed. It read, "You are not a prisoner. You are under my protection. There is a difference. I will spend however long it takes to prove that to you." Melissa ate standing up, her back to the wall, her eyes on the door. She didn't believe a word of it. But the food was good, and she was too tired to starve on principle. 3 days passed. Hak Yong never entered her room. He never demanded her presence at meals, never summoned her, never raised his voice within earshot. She was given free run of the house, every room except the east wing, accessible only through a keypad-locked door. The staff glanced at nervously whenever they passed. Melissa spent those days memorizing hallways, camera angles, guard rotations. She was building an escape plan, the way her mother had taught her to cook, one careful layer at a time. But she was also watching him. Hak Yong moved through his home with the quiet precision of a man accustomed to being both the safest and the most dangerous thing in any room. He took meals alone. He read poetry and history in the library until late. Once, passing his study, she heard him on the phone in rapid Korean, his voice sharp enough to cut glass, and for 30 seconds, she heard the man the streets feared. Then the call ended, and he was just a man by a window, watching the rain. She didn't trust the gentleness. She couldn't. Gentleness from a man like Hak Yong was either a weapon or a trick, and she refused to be foolish enough to find out which. On the 5th night, Melissa found out exactly what her husband was capable of. She'd been unable to sleep. The estate at midnight was a different animal than the estate at noon, quieter in some ways, louder in others. She heard car doors slam in the courtyard, voices speaking low and fast, then footsteps moving toward the east wing, the keypad-locked door. Curiosity and fear have the same heartbeat, and Melissa followed both down the stairs, barefoot on cold stone, until she reached a corridor she hadn't explored. The door to the east wing was open, just a crack, as if someone had been careless, or as if carelessness didn't matter when the only people inside were predators. Through the gap, she could see a room lit by a single overhead lamp. Concrete floor, drain in the center. A man sat in a metal chair, his wrists zip-tied to the armrests, his face already swollen beyond recognition. blood mapping the front of his shirt like a Rorschach test. Hak Yong stood in front of him. His suit jacket was off, sleeves rolled to his elbows, tattoos fully visible now, an intricate dragon winding from wrist to shoulder, scales rendered in ink so dark it looked like shadow given form. His posture was relaxed, patient, the way a man stands when he has all the time in the world and the person in front of him has none. "I asked you a question 12 hours ago," Hak Yong said. His voice was conversational, almost pleasant, and that was the most terrifying part. "I'll ask it once more. Who sent you into my territory? And who inside this house told them where to find the shipment?" The man in the chair spat blood and said something Melissa couldn't hear. Whatever it was the wrong answer. Hak Yong moved with a speed that made Melissa's breath lock in her chest. One hand gripped the man's jaw. The other produced a blade so thin it caught the light like a strand of spider silk. What followed was precise and methodical, and absolutely without mercy. No rage, no shouting. Just the calm, surgical work of a man extracting information the way a dentist extracts a tooth, with tools and technique, and no concern for the patient's comfort. Melissa pressed her hand over her mouth to keep the sound inside. Her knees buckled. She caught herself against the wall and backed away, one careful step at a time, until the corridor swallowed the light from that room, and she was standing alone in the dark, trembling so violently that her teeth chattered. This was who she'd married, not the man who left warm meals outside her door, not the man who read poetry in the library. This was Hak Yong, the version the streets knew, the version that made grown men weep at the mention of his name. And she was locked inside his house with no way out, and a door that only locked from her side, because he'd decided to let it, not because she had any real power at all. She didn't sleep that night, or the next. 1 week into the marriage, Melissa asked to leave the estate. She needed air that didn't taste like luxury and surveillance. She expected Hak Yong to refuse. Instead, he assigned her a convoy, 2 armored SUVs, 6 men, and a driver named Dae Jung, who had the build of a refrigerator and the disposition of a librarian. "Stay with the detail," Hak Yong told her that morning. He was standing in the foyer, dressed for whatever violence the day required, but his eyes on her were the same as always, steady, searching, impossibly soft. "If anything feels wrong, tell Dae Jung. He'll get you home." Home. As if this fortress was home. As if she'd chosen any of this. Melissa nodded without speaking and climbed into the back seat of the lead vehicle. The city hit her like oxygen after drowning. She asked Dae Jung to stop at a bookshop in Wicker Park, and for 20 minutes, she almost felt like herself again. The first bullet came through the windshield of the rear SUV while they were pulling away from the curb. The sound was concussive, a sharp crack, followed by the wet thud of safety glass collapsing inward. Dae Jung's arm shot across Melissa's chest, slamming her down below the window line before she could process what was happening. "Stay down!" Tires screamed against asphalt. The SUV lurched forward, then braked hard as a black van swerved in front of them, blocking the street. Gunfire erupted from both sides. Melissa heard the bodyguards returning fire, heard shouting in Korean, heard something heavy, hit the roof of the car and slide off. She was on the floor with her arms over her head, and all she could think was, this is how it ends. Traded for a debt and killed in a bookshop parking lot. Then the firing pattern changed. It went from chaotic to singular, one weapon cutting through the noise with a rhythm that was almost mechanical in its precision, measured, deliberate. Every shot followed by a half-second of silence. Then another shot. Someone was picking off targets, the way a conductor moves through a symphony, one note at a time. Dae Jung's radio crackled. He exhaled like a man who'd been holding his breath for a year. "Boss is here." Melissa didn't look up. She heard car doors opening. She heard bodies hitting pavement. She heard footsteps approaching the SUV, fast and purposeful. And then the door was yanked open, and Hak Yong was crouching in the space where the door had been. His suit jacket gone, his white shirt spotted with blood that didn't belong to him. A gun still in his right hand with the barrel pointed at the ground. His left hand found her face. Both hands, actually, cradling her jaw, turning her head gently, checking for damage with the frantic precision of a man who'd rehearsed this nightmare 1,000 times. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. She was shaking everywhere else, but she shook her head. Something broke open behind his eyes. Relief so raw, it looked like agony. He pulled her against his chest, one arm locked around her shoulders, the gun still in his other hand, and held her in the middle of a street that smelled like gunpowder and burnt rubber, and the particular silence that follows violence. "I will kill every one of them," he said, into her hair. It wasn't a threat. It was a promise delivered with the quiet certainty of a man stating the weather. Every person who sent them. Every hand that planned this. Melissa wanted to pull away. She wanted to be terrified, and she was. But underneath the terror was something she hadn't expected. Safety. In the arms of the most violent man she'd ever known, surrounded by the aftermath of a gunfight, she felt, against every rational instinct, safe. That terrified her more than the bullets had. The attack changed everything. Hak Yong tripled security, canceled meetings, and spent 3 days locked in the East Wing. When he emerged, he looked like a man who hadn't slept, but had accomplished exactly what he'd set out to do. 2 days later, the news reported that a significant faction within the Yun cartel had been dissolved. The word was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Melissa found herself restless. The attack had cracked something open in her, not trust exactly, but curiosity. The gap between the man in the interrogation room and the man who'd cradled her face in a bullet-riddled street was too wide to ignore. She needed to understand it, or at least to try. On a Tuesday afternoon, while Hak Yong was away and the staff occupied with deliveries, Melissa slipped into his private study. The room was sparse. A desk made of dark wood, a leather chair, floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filled with volumes in Korean and English. No photographs on the walls. No personal clutter. The desk was clean, except for a laptop and a single framed object she hadn't noticed from the doorway. She stepped closer. It was a fare card, a CTA transit card, old enough that the plastic had yellowed at the edges, laminated and mounted in a simple black frame. Next to it, tucked into the corner of the frame, was a photograph, small, slightly blurred, taken from a distance with a phone camera that was at least a decade old. The photograph was of her. Melissa's legs went numb. She gripped the edge of the desk and stared. The girl in the picture was 17, maybe 18, school uniform, hair in braids, standing at a bus stop on the south side with a backpack over one shoulder and a look on her face that was pure, unbothered, teenage impatience. She remembered that bus stop. She remembered that uniform. But she didn't remember the photograph being taken. And she didn't remember, and then she did. It hit her like a wave. A rainy afternoon in October, 10 years ago. She'd been waiting for the 63rd Street bus when a boy stumbled out of the alley across the street. Korean. Thin. Maybe her age, maybe younger. His lip was split. His jacket was torn. He had the hunted look of someone who'd been running longer than just that afternoon. He'd collapsed on the bench next to her, breathing hard, and she'd looked at him the way she looked at everyone, straight on, without flinching. He didn't ask for help. He didn't say a word, but when the bus came and he didn't move, she understood. No money, no one waiting for him, nowhere to go. Melissa had pulled her fare card from her pocket, swiped it twice, and handed it to the driver. "He's with me," she'd said, and the boy had followed her onto the bus without a word. They'd ridden 6 stops in silence. When he stood to get off, she'd pressed the fare card into his hand. "Keep it. You might need it again." He'd looked at her then, really looked at her, with dark eyes that held something she was too young to name. Then he was gone, swallowed by the rain and the city, and whatever life he was running from. She'd forgotten about it within a week. It was a small kindness, the kind her mother had taught her to scatter like seeds without counting what grew. But he hadn't forgotten. He'd kept the fare card for 10 years. He'd framed it. He'd placed it on the only desk in his empire where no one else was allowed to sit. And somewhere between that rainy bus stop and this fortress north of Chicago, the battered boy had become the most dangerous man in the Midwest, and he'd never stopped looking for the girl who'd swiped her fare card twice. Melissa set the frame down with trembling hands. The room felt different now. The entire house felt different. Every locked door she'd been given the key to. Every meal left warm outside her room. Every soft word spoken through wood and silence. It wasn't a strategy. It wasn't manipulation. It was a decade of devotion from a man who'd built an empire and still kept a fare card in a frame because a girl on the South Side had treated him like a person when no one else would. She pressed both hands flat against the desk and breathed until the trembling stopped. Then she straightened up, walked out of the study, and closed the door behind her. She didn't know what she felt, but for the first time since the altar, she knew it wasn't fear. If you're hooked on Melissa and Hak Yong's impossible love story, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell, because the next chapter is going to be insane. Comment below Team Melissa or Team Hak Yong. Don't miss what happens next. Their love is about to face its deadliest test yet. See you in the next. The woman's name was Sumin. She'd been part of the household staff since before Melissa arrived, quiet and efficient, with the kind of face that didn't stick in memory. She brought Melissa tea every afternoon at 3, always with a small plate of honey cookies, and a smile that seemed warmer than anyone else's in the estate. Melissa had started to look forward to it, which should have been her first warning. Trust in a house full of killers was a liability, not a comfort. It started small, a comment while folding laundry. You must miss your father. Then, the next day, something sharper. It must be hard, not knowing if he's safe. Melissa had frozen at that. She hadn't spoken to Patrick since the wedding. Hak Yong had told her the family was being looked after, that Jada was continuing school, that Patrick was in a recovery program. She'd had no way to verify any of it. Near the end of the second week, Sumin closed the bedroom door behind her and set the tea tray down with hands that trembled just enough to look convincing. Mrs. Yong, I shouldn't tell you this. If he finds out I spoke to you, he'll kill me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Your father, he's dead. The boss had him killed 2 days after the wedding. The debt wasn't enough. He wanted no loose ends. The room tilted. Melissa gripped the edge of the dresser, her knuckles going white. You're lying. Sumin pulled a phone from her apron pocket. On the screen was a photograph of Patrick McGuire's bar. The front window shattered. Yellow police tape stretched across the door. Below it, a news headline. Southside bar owner found dead in apparent homicide. Melissa's vision narrowed to a point. The article could have been fabricated. The photo could have been staged. She knew that intellectually. But the part of her that had spent her entire life expecting the worst, the part that had never fully believed a man like Hak Yong could be anything other than what the streets said he was, that part swallowed the lie whole. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She went very still, the way prey goes still when it realizes the trap has already closed, and began to plan. That night, at 2 a.m., Melissa pulled on dark clothes, took the small bag she'd packed weeks ago during her escape planning phase, and slipped out through the service corridor she'd mapped on her third day. The kitchen entrance led to a delivery path along the east wall. From there, a maintenance gate near the garden shed. She'd watched the guard rotation long enough to know there was a 4-minute gap between patrols at that gate. 4 minutes was enough. The October air hit her like a slap. The ground was wet, the sky starless, and a cold rain had started falling in sheets that blurred the floodlights along the perimeter wall. She moved fast, staying low, her sneakers sinking into soft earth with every step. The maintenance gate was 50 yards ahead. 40, 30. She didn't see the black sedan parked on the other side of the wall until she was close enough to read its plates. Two men leaned against the hood, smoking, their faces lit briefly by the orange flare of cigarettes. They weren't Hak Yong's men. She recognized the tattoo on the closer man's neck, a serpent coiled around a skull. Yun cartel. They were waiting for her. Sumin hadn't just fed her a lie, she'd herded her straight into a trap. Melissa stopped dead, one hand on the gate latch. The rain was coming down so hard she could barely see 10 feet, but she could see enough. The closer man had straightened up and was reaching for something at his hip. If she opened that gate, she was theirs. She turned to run back toward the house and collided with a wall of a man. Hak Yong stood in the rain like he'd been carved from it. No jacket. His white shirt soaked through and clinging to his frame, the tattoos beneath visible like shadows under ice. His hair was plastered to his forehead. His eyes were black and burning, with something that looked like fury, until she looked closer and realized it was fear. "Get behind me," he said. "Now." "Don't touch me." She stumbled backward, her bag dropping into the mud. "You killed him. You killed my father." Something cracked in his expression. Not anger. Something worse. Pain. The kind that comes from being accused of the one thing you tried hardest to prevent. "Who told you that?" "Does it matter? He's dead. And you. He's not dead." Hak Yong's voice cut through the rain like a gunshot. "Your father is alive. He's in a treatment facility in Wisconsin, under a false name, with 2 of my men watching the door. Whoever told you otherwise is working for the people standing on the other side of that wall." Melissa's chest heaved. Rain ran into her eyes, down her neck, soaking through layers she'd chosen for running. Not for standing in a downpour, arguing with a man who might be lying, or might be the only reason she was still breathing. "Why should I believe you? You bought me. You own me. Everything in that house is designed to make me forget that." Hak Yong took a step closer, not threatening, desperate. "I bought your debt because the Yun cartel was going to sell you. Not marry you. Sell you. To a trafficking ring that moves women through Eastern Europe and never brings them back. Your father's debt gave them legal cover to take you and your sister. I eliminated that option, the only way I knew how." His voice broke on the last word, and in 2 weeks of living in his house, Melissa had never heard his voice do anything but command. "I didn't buy you, Melissa. I bought your freedom. The marriage was the only structure that gave me legal grounds to protect you." Behind her, on the other side of the wall, she heard the sedan's engine turn over. The Yun men had heard voices. They were repositioning. Hak Yong's hand found hers. His grip was shaking. The most dangerous man in the Midwest was standing in the rain with shaking hands, and that single detail undid something in Melissa that 2 weeks of warm meals and poetry books and unlocked doors had not been able to reach. "Come inside," he said. "Please." She looked at the gate. She looked at him. Then she let him lead her back through the rain, and neither of them let go until they were inside. Sumin was gone by morning. Melissa didn't ask where. She was learning that some questions in this house came with answers she wasn't ready to carry. The attack came 4 days later, at 3 a.m, with the sound of the front gate being torn from its hinges by an armored truck. Melissa woke to sirens she'd never heard before, a shrill, pulsing alarm that turned the estate's hallways red with emergency lighting. Hak Yong was at her door in seconds, fully dressed, a vest over his shirt, a weapon in each hand. His face was stone. "With me. Now." She didn't hesitate. Whatever space had existed between them before the rain, whatever doubt remained, it evaporated in the face of the explosions, rocking the east wing. She grabbed his hand and ran. The safe room was beneath the house, accessed through a reinforced door behind the library's back wall. 8 inches of steel, biometric lock, independent air supply. Inside, it looked like a bunker dressed as a living room. Monitors showing camera feeds from every angle of the estate, a communication console, and enough supplies for a week. Hak Yong sealed the door and immediately began coordinating his men through a headset, issuing orders in rapid Korean, his voice, the calm center of a storm, tearing his world apart. On the monitors, Melissa watched it happen. The Yun cartel had come with everything. 3 armored vehicles, 40 men, maybe more. Heavy weapons that shredded the garden wall and turned the front courtyard into a killing field. Hak Yong's men fought back with a discipline that bordered on devotion, holding choke points and retreating in organized layers. But they were outnumbered. The perimeter fell within 20 minutes, the ground floor within 30. "They're not here for the house," Hak Yong said, his eyes never leaving the monitors. "They're here for you." Melissa stared at him. "Why? The debt is settled. You paid it. Because I took what they considered theirs." To the Yun, this was never about money. It's about power, about proving that no one, not even me, can take from them without consequence. He turned to face her. "I knew they'd come eventually. I planned for it. But not this soon, and not with this many." For the first time, she saw uncertainty in his eyes, not fear for himself, fear for her. The monitors flickered. The feeds from the East Wing went black, one by one, like eyes closing. The breach came through the floor. An explosion beneath the safe room cracked the concrete foundation and sent Melissa tumbling into the wall. Dust filled the air. The lights died. Then the emergency backup kicked in, bathing everything in a sickly yellow glow. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard the reinforced door groaning, metal bending under sustained force from the other side. Hak Yong positioned himself between Melissa and the door. He set one gun on the console beside him, kept the other raised, and waited with the patience of a man who'd been preparing for this moment his entire life. "When that door opens," he said without turning around, "you stay behind me, no matter what happens, no matter what you see. Hak Yong, promise me. I promise." The door gave. 3 men came through the gap in a wave of smoke and muzzle flash. Hak Yong fired with the precision she'd seen on the street that day, controlled, lethal, each shot finding its mark. 2 men dropped. The third got off a round, before Hak Yong's bullet caught him in the throat. That single round hit Hak Yong in the chest. The impact threw him backward into Melissa. She caught him, or tried to, his weight driving them both to the ground. The gun clattered from his hand and skidded across the floor. Blood spread across his white shirt in a dark bloom that grew faster than she could process, and his breathing changed immediately. Shallow, wet, wrong. No, 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 no. Melissa pressed her hands against the wound, feeling the heat of his blood between her fingers. "Stay with me. Look at me." His eyes found hers. Even now, even with a bullet in his chest and his life leaking through her fingers, he looked at her the way he always had, like she was the altar. Like she was the prayer. "Bus stop," he whispered. 63rd Street. It was raining. Melissa's breath seized. Don't do this right now." I was 16, running from my father's men. He wanted me dead, because I wouldn't kill for him. A cough, wet and terrible. I had nothing. No money. No name. No reason to keep breathing. Then this girl at a bus stop looked at me like I was a person, swiped her card twice and said, "He's with me." His hand found hers, his grip weakening by the second. 3 words. "You saved my life with 3 words and a bus fare, and I have loved you every single day since." Tears streamed down Melissa's face, mixing with dust and blood. "You don't get to die telling me this. You hear me? You don't get to make me love you and then leave." His eyes widened slightly, a ghost of that smile. "You love me? I love you, you impossible, terrifying, stubborn man. So don't you dare." His eyes started to close. Movement at the door. A 4th man stepped through the breach, weapon raised, scanning the room through the smoke. He saw Hak Yong on the ground. He saw Melissa kneeling over him. He raised his gun. Melissa's hand was already moving. The gun Hak Yong had set on the console was 3 feet away. She'd never fired a weapon in her life. She'd never held one. but her body moved before her mind could catch up, fueled by something older than training, older than fear. Something that lived in the same place as the girl who'd swiped her card twice for a stranger, because it was the right thing to do. She grabbed the gun, turned, and fired. The recoil nearly broke her wrist. The shot went wide, hitting the wall. The man flinched, adjusted, aimed at her chest. She fired again. This time, the bullet found him center mass. He dropped. Melissa didn't stop. She grabbed the headset from the console, pressed the button she'd watched Hak Yong use, and screamed into it with a voice she didn't recognize as her own. "He's down. The boss is down. I need medical in the safe room now." Daejong's voice came back, strained but steady. "Perimeter is secured. Hold on. 2 minutes. The longest 2 minutes of her life." She spent them with Hak Yong's head in her lap, one hand pressing his wound, the other holding his face, talking to him in a voice that shook but never stopped. She told him about the bus stop. She told him about the rain. She told him she'd forgotten his face, but never forgot the feeling of doing something kind for a stranger, and that if he died on this floor, she would never forgive him for making her remember. He was still breathing when they came. The surgery took 11 hours. Melissa sat in the hallway of a private medical facility that didn't appear on any map, wearing borrowed clothes, stained with his blood, and refused to move until someone told her he would live. When the surgeon finally emerged and nodded, Melissa put her head in her hands and wept the way she hadn't let herself weep since her mother died. 3 weeks later, Hak Yong woke to find Melissa sitting in the chair beside his bed, reading a book of Korean poetry she'd taken from his library. Her hair was pulled back. She wore no makeup. She looked exhausted and steady and entirely unafraid. "You're awake," she said, without looking up. "You're still here," he said. She closed the book and met his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere, but things are going to change. I'm not a guest in this house anymore, and I'm not a protected asset. If I'm in this, I'm in it as your equal. I sit at the table. I know what's happening. No more locked wings, no more secrets, no more decisions about my life made without me in the room." Hak Yong studied her for a long moment. Then that faint, impossible smile. "You shot a man for me. I shot a man for us. There's a difference." He reached for her hand. She gave it. A month after that, Melissa stood at his side during a meeting with every lieutenant in the syndicate. She wore black, her posture straight, her gaze level. The men who had once escorted her like cargo now addressed her as an authority. Not because Hak Yong commanded it, though he would have, because they'd heard what she did in the safe room. Because the woman who'd picked up a gun she'd never held and stood over their fallen boss had earned something that couldn't be given. Respect, the kind that comes from blood and choice, and the refusal to let the people you love die on a concrete floor. That evening, alone on the balcony of the estate, Hak Yong stood behind her and wrapped his arms around her shoulders. The garden below was still being repaired. Bullet holes marked the stone walls like constellations of everything they'd survived. "Do you regret it?" he asked. "Any of it?" Melissa leaned back against him. She thought about the altar, the tear, the white cloth pressed to her cheek by tattooed fingers. She thought about a rainy bus stop and a boy with a split lip and a fare card she'd given away without a second thought. "I regret nothing," she said, "except that I didn't remember you sooner." He pressed his lips to her temple, and they stood there, in the quiet, two people who'd found each other twice, once by accident and once by design, and chose, finally, to stop letting the world tell them what they were allowed to have. Can Melissa survive the deadly world she married into? Or will the enemies circling Hak Yong destroy everything before he can reveal the truth? And what secret from a rainy bus stop 10 years ago connects a terrified bride to the most dangerous man in Chicago? Smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because you do not want to miss what happens next.